Today's talk will explore how new advances in computer vision are revolutionizing marine research, making underwater imagery analysis more efficient and insightful. So we're lucky today to be joined by two experts in this field. We have Dr. Joe Marlow and Dr. John Halpin, who are both based at the Scottish Association for Marine Science. So Joe is a benthic ecologist and specialises in using photogrammetry and artificial intelligence to study marine growth on offshore structures. John is a marine image analysis analyst and specialises in using custom deep learning tools to automatically identify marine species. So without further delay, I'll hand over to our speakers.
I'm Joe. And this is John. We both work at SAMS. I'm a kind of, old-fashioned benthic ecologist that is, over the past few years, learning the ropes of some kind of advanced image analysis tools that help me in my workflow. And I guess, John, you're the opposite, really, aren't you?
Yeah, very much coming at it from more the computing side. My history was image analysis, and I've kind of come into marine biology recently.
Yeah, so we're all kind of quite enjoying learning what the other side does and how we can use it. Right, so I'll crack on. Let me know if you can't see anything. Oh, hang on. There we go. Right, so I think as most of you are watching this will kind of know and understand, we use underwater imagery in our work because we have been using it for a very, very long time. I like this image there on the top right. It's Hans and Lottie Haas, who I guess were underwater documentary makers. But ever since we've been able to go underwater, we've been able to take cameras pretty much. And cameras are incredibly efficient. We're often limited in terms of time in the field, but we have plenty of time sitting at our desks afterwards to analyze data. So cameras are very good at collecting huge amounts of data quickly, and so that we can use our time more efficiently when we're in the field and then spend more time afterwards analyzing it. And that comes in whether it's kind of 2D images or videos. And I guess the platforms that we use to collect these images have become more and more complicated over the years. Many of us will be familiar with this image in the middle right there, which was it's a kind of benthic sledge. We've got some stereo bruvs there, baited remote underwater video, and these days more and more of us are using kind of more autonomous platforms, ROVs and AUVs. So as I said, very, very efficient in terms of data collection, and that's the good side. And obviously the data can be stored retrospectively and retrospectively analyzed over time. The bad part is that obviously the processing can be extremely slow. And as the platforms get bigger, more complicated, we collect more and more data. You think of something like an AUV, it can be cruising for hours, if not days at a time, taking photographs every second. It's a huge amount of data. And the metrics that we gather from them, from certainly 2D imagery, aren't necessarily always appropriate for the analysis we want to do. So if you look at the top right image there, this is what kind of my bread and butter of my PhD used to be, which is a analysis of coral reef imagery using a piece of software called CPC, where you'd randomly overlay points and then manually identify what was under the points. Obviously very labor intensive, but also it would spit out basically indices of percentage cover or frequency, which for me, and I was interested in large sponges like that barrel sponge in the image, percent cover might not be necessarily representative of its abundance, because actually it's not flat, it's not an encrusting species, it's actually a very large, in terms of biomass, kind of erect organism. So a kind of 2D analysis that might not be the most appropriate. So with advances computer vision, we're kind of looking to address some of that.
Okay, so AI or computer vision has many applications in underwater imagery. Its usefulness has very much come about through developments in relatively recent developments in neural networks and the processing power that's come with GPUs. So that's like a graphics card. kind of the part of your computer that actually lets your computer display an image on a screen. The most common use case of computer vision in marine science is generally to extract some metric from an image. So, for example, this could just be counting fish in an image. There's many different types of sort of computer vision task. They have very specific labels in computer vision, and they can be used for very specific tasks in marine science. So, for instance, a computer vision task known as semantic segmentation. So that's effectively colouring everything in with its kind of where the colour is what that thing's label is being used on the right to identify species in footage. So this is some diver footage of a common marine growth species, and you can see that the computer's kind of correctly labelling those species and assigning a kind of a coloured label to that species as the camera passes. Other examples could be individual tracking. So an individual is detected and tracked in footage. And actual use cases of these techniques could be individual recognition. So we might want to recognise named individuals in footage or pictures, or species recognition. So we might not care about that individual. It might just be, well, we just want to know, for instance, is it a haddock? In which case we could do species recognition. Importantly, AI or computer vision is a solution to too much data. So computers are very good at doing repetitive tasks very quickly. So kind of in the problem that kind of new image acquisition techniques present to us, in that we're ending up with so much data, computers are very much a solution to this. Actually, back to Joe.
Yeah, so John's going to cover a lot of the kind of machine learning, computer vision side of things, and I'm going to cover photogrammetry. I'll read out that definition. Photogrammetry gathers measurements and data about an object by analysing the change in position from two different images, two or more, basically. So there's an image there on the right-hand side of video, and this is basically illustrating the various stages of making a 3D model using photogrammetry. In this case, of well, that's the end of the video. Anyway, it was of a cold water coral. And basically what's gone into making that 3D virtual model is we've taken lots of individual 2D images and we have, in this case, put it into a piece of software called Metashape, but there are other software out there. And the software has recognized commonalities between all of those 2D images, worked out basically the relative position of where those pictures were taken from, and then stitched those images together to create a model of that coral. And so from that, we can get all kinds of interesting geometric data, and it can be used in basically applications that range from 2D to even 4D. And in this presentation, we'll cover certainly some of the 2D and 3D applications. The 4D stuff is stuff we're still trying to work out, to be honest. Yeah. Right, so John's going to go over some kind of example case studies of how computer vision can improve your marine imagery workflow.
Okay, so my first example is the Rate-A-Skate project. So for any of you that aren't familiar with flapper skates, they're an absolutely amazing creature. This is one on the right. Sadly, they're now classified as critically endangered by the IUCN due to historical overexploitation. The coasts around kind of the UK are one of their last holdouts, really. But yeah, they're incredible things. Just to give you an idea of the size, so they can grow to up to 2.5 meters in length and 2 meters across. So absolutely, very big. Now, in order to monitor skates, we need novel monitoring approaches, and these could ideally let us assess the efficiency of management measures such as MPAs and for the conservation and recovery of relic skate populations. Luckily, nature has kind of provided us with a novel monitoring approach for skates kind of built in. So Stephen Benjamins et al. Demonstrated that adult skate can individually be recognisable with a very high degree of certainty through a characteristic dorsal spot pattern on the skate's back. So if you look at our nice top-down picture of a skate on the bottom left, you can see it has this very nice spot pattern. Now that spot pattern is unique to that skate. So if we see another skate, another photograph with that unique spot pattern, we know it's the same skate. Now this is great, and it's led to a database being set up with a website called SkateSpotter. Very much a success story. So it's citizen science populated. So anglers go out, and if they catch a skate, they submit a photograph to us. We then ID that skate. At the moment, the database holds over 2,000 individuals and 5,000 photographs of them. So it's doing very well, but it has a problem. So individual recognition of skate is very hard and time consuming. So to demonstrate how tricky that is for you, so I've got a little quiz for you. So there's two images of skate here. I don't know if this will work, but we'll try. Can you put your team's hand up if you think they are different individuals? Keep your team's hand down if you think they are the same individual. And I'll just give that a minute to see what happens. Oh, I can see hands going up and down. This is fantastic. Hopefully we're reaching a bit of a consensus here, but certainly on the people that I can see on my screen, it's maybe about half and half. Some people are saying the same, some people are saying a different individual. Honestly, I couldn't actually tell you, but someone that could explain to me that they are the same skate. So what can we learn from that? Well, human vision is only optimized for certain domains. So we might be very good at telling different people apart, but skates, not so much. Skates are tricky. Luckily, advances in computer vision have made individual recognition possible. And this is very much being driven by facial recognition technology. Now, pipelines for doing this all kind of tended towards a very similar design. To give you an example of what this sort of design looks like, so it's a multi-stage pipeline. The first step in the pipeline takes a picture of an individual and it automatically crops that individual. But why is this important? Well, if we're going to feed in images to a kind of an algorithm that recognizes individuals, we don't want it to be influenced by any biases that might come from the background in this image. I'll give you an example on the next slide, but just remember that one. The next step is we have a trained neural network that generates embeddings for those individuals. Embeddings is just a list of numbers. Now, if that individual is the same individual, we'd expect embeddings for different images to be very similar. And if we're looking at embeddings from different individuals, we'd expect those embeddings to be very different. So all we do is feed an image through this pipeline. If we get an output of embeddings that's very similar to another image, well, that would suggest it's the same skate. Dead easy. So we set up a pipeline like this and trained it. So the first stage, we trained a computer just to segment skate. So this is an example of the output from that. So this is a nice one. This is one I wanted to show you because the specific angler wears these very specific yellow welly boots, and he likes to stand just like that at the back of the skate. Now, he also tends to catch the same skate because he fishes in the same area. So you can see that we really don't want to start to associate that fisherman with skate, or we don't want to let the algorithm do that. Because while it's likely that he is going to catch the same skate, it's not to say he will always. It's very important that the computer learns just to identify the skate purely on its looks alone. And the second step, we trained a neural network using the SkateSpotter database to output the embeddings that I explained to you on the previous slide. How did this work? Well, really well, actually. I was very happy. So I guess what I want you to take away from this slide is the kind of the best performing result. So I tried different designs of neural network and so on, but the best was known as a ResNet 101. In 80% or in a test set of 100 images, 80 of those, it had correctly identified the correct skate as the first prediction, which is, I think, both good and useful. Why isn't it 100%? Well, I guess it itself is perhaps could perform better, but also looking at the training set, there's a lot of images that are out of distribution. So it turns out that some skates actually don't have these characteristic spot patterns. Some of the images are just horrific. Some anglers aren't the best photographers, it turns out. So yeah, I'm very, very happy. The next step is to integrate this with the Skate Spotter database. So that has an angler uploads a photograph. They get kind of real-time feedback of like, oh, you just caught Fred. Also, there's a new design of bruvs being trialled that take top-down images by the Orkney Skate Trust. And we're really hoping that, well, not only can we work on angler-submitted images, we can actually ID skates as they're seen by bruvs, which I think is very, very cool. Okay, on to another project. This is the CAI project. CAI is streamlined and efficient artificial intelligence assisted underwater video analysis for aquaculture site assessment. Quite a mouthful. In effect, for a new site to be used for aquaculture, extensive underwater surveys have to be done, lots of videos taken. That takes a lot of time to sift through to look for priority marine features. So we're developing a tool where if position information and footage, so that's the inputs on the left, are fed in, computer vision is used to detect PMFs in that footage and spit out a GIS layer with individual detections labelled on that GIS layer. Also, when you click on a point in that GIS layer, it links back to an annotated image. Just to give you an example of that kind of working, so this is some footage, I think, from the Sound of Mull, and you can see northern sea fans that are being identified. I think at some point in this is a squat lobster that's also identified as a northern sea fan, but it mostly works very well. I think what we learned from this is that some species work very well, so like these northern sea fans. Others are very tricky, for instance, horse mussels, stay frequently kind of encrusted in other things, and don't often look the same between different sites. But yeah, it's been an interesting project. Okay, so I'll pass you back to Joe now.
Yeah, so John and I work increasingly these days in Greenland. We've got a good collaboration there, and it's makes for a nice visit, doesn't it? We work with the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources, and they have a large benthic survey program, which kind of works hand in hand with their fisheries survey program. So the image on the right there is, you can see the kind of locations where they've basically done large benthic video sledges, which is the bottom left image there. It's a huge tank of a thing, and it needs to be because it's dragged behind this ship at about 1,000 meters, and on it has a GoPro. It's quite simple tech, really. It's a GoPro, a couple of lights, and a couple of lasers that are placed parallel to each other to allow for scaling. And at each of these locations, it's moved along the seabed. Its position is geo-referenced, and there is GoPro footage of what it finds down there. And so we've got about 400 videos from across the kind of continental shelf and shelf edge. And the problem, I think many of you will be familiar with this, is that actually a lot of these videos haven't been analysed. They're collected because actually it is quite difficult to analyse that vast amount of data. And it has been analysed. It's been analysed by different groups, and they've been looking at different things. So one group might be interested in soft corals, another group might be interested in a certain area. So it hasn't been analysed consistently from across all of these sites. So we now have a collaboration that's between SAMS and our kind of parent academic institution, which is University of Highlands and Islands, and the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources. And we've actually got a funded PhD student who is now using machine learning, and in this case, probably kind of object ID, like the video example on the right-hand side there, which has used a YOLO model to identify what is predominantly here Geodia sponges. I think there is the odd Polymastia sponge and an urchin in there. This kind of really highlights what can be done. We actually trained this from about 40 images, which I did on a piece of annotating software called CVAT. It probably took me, I don't know, half an hour to annotate the required amount of images for the training set. And how long would you say, John, for the training?
About the same.
About the same. We've got a fairly beefy computer, but not very long. This is probably quite a simple data set for it because it's just mud and geodia. It gets more complicated, the kind of more diversity you put in there, the less distinctive the taxa are. But the idea is to analyze all of these videos, so nearly 400 videos from across the Greenlandic continental shelf, so we can create a kind of geo-reference data layer which can be imported, which can make a shapefile, so this can kind of go towards government spatial planning for the shelf area, because the Greenland government is very interested in kind of really creating some robust marine spatial planning, but they're not quite there just yet because they don't really have the data. Right, I'm going to go into photogrammetry, which, if you remember, I touched on at the start, is using many individual 2D images, putting them into a piece of software which kind of recognizes the consistencies between the two of them, or various images, and so you can actually start to create some large 2D orthomosaics or 3D models from them. So I'll kind of basically start with what you need for photogrammetry, and it's pretty simple. You just need a camera. It can be anything. So anything from your iPhone to GoPros. We use GoPros quite a lot because they're pretty robust and cheap. But to drones, ROVs, and indeed, AUVs. What you do need to do is you actually need to have a kind of a consistent way of actually capturing the images. For the images to be aligned in the software, you need to have about 60% overlap as a minimum between each adjacent image. So if you're going out and doing a survey, we kind of given two different examples here. You can kind of do what's known as a lawnmower fashion, which is basically creating as much overlap and as much coverage between your images as possible. So the more the better in many ways. It basically creates better alignment and will create a better model at the end of it. So that can go on to produce what's known as an orthomosaic, which is stitching all of those images together to create, kind of effectively a panorama, but it's auto-rectified, so it's looking directly down on it. In this case, this was a reef survey I did on just a rocky reef very nearby to Sam's, done on scuba with that camera setup you can see in the top right there, which is a pair of GoPros and a video light. The benefit of the pair of GoPros is that if we know the distance between two cameras, this is called a stereo pair, we can actually then scale the image. So I can measure any of one of those. I can zoom in, I can get quite high definition images from quite close by, but I can also start to measure things like percentage cover and so on. And this can be done over a very large spatial scale. This is a relatively small one. That transect tape was probably about 30 meters or so. And this basically was just done by me swimming up and down with these GoPros, kind of facing almost directly downwards, slightly oblique. And to survey that took probably about 10 minutes. As I said, this can be done on a much, much bigger scale. So this is footage from, I've got Boaty in the boat face there. It wasn't quite Boaty. It was Gavia, which is one of Sam's Nurk, I think, actually. Yeah. AUVs. And I think they were actually doing this survey for pockmarks, weren't they? Yeah, exactly. And so John actually processed this because you can see the raw image there was kind of had a weird color slant. It had vignetting, and so he applied some processing afterwards, kind of to get a more balanced image, and then it produces this large orthomosaic, which, because the Gavia, the vehicle in this case, has GPS data, I think it's to DVL. It can be georeferenced. You can also start to you could apply object detection to this, so you can start to identify images within that large orthomosaic. So it does start to open up a world of opportunities rather than just looking at individual images. And where this is probably most widely used, and actually we're only really starting to put our foot in the door of this, is with drone photogrammetry. This was surveys John and I have just returned from Greenland. We had a completely failed trip because our ROV broke. And so we decided, working with our collaborator, they were interested in intertidal algae, and so we did some drone surveys of the intertidal there. And so the far left-hand image you can see is the actual raw imagery. And as you go kind of from left to right, that's an elevation model, so we can break it down into different elevations. the second from the right image there is actually color coded by slope. So you can start to see where in that image with the higher elements of slope, where we're flatter. And then on the far right, what we've actually brought into that is some semantic segmentation. So the image is actually being segmented by intertidal algae. And that's what our project will actually be. We're going to use this is built in Azure software. We've imported it to another piece of software called Cloud Compare, and we'll start to break it down into shore heights and start to measure the amount of intertidal algae by shore height. And again, this took, and often on intertidal, you're quite rushed for time because you've got low tide, and with every minute after that, it's starting to creep up. This is the area there, kind of lengthwise, is about 30 meters, and the drone survey, what did you say, John? 10 minutes? Yeah, exactly. So it's a very highly efficient way of collecting the data, and actually the analysis time is also very, very quick, given sufficient computing power, I would add. Of course, what a lot of photogrammetry is used for is actually taking that data and producing 3D geometric information. So that is that same shoreline, but now we've used it to make a 3D model. And 3D photogrammetry has been used in a range of kind of marine ecology scopes. A lot of it is just about different ways of measuring abundance. So as I mentioned at the start, maybe for kind of more 3D, say benthos, actually measuring it in 3D in terms of its abundance is more appropriate than a 2D measurement. But we can use it to very accurately also measure complexity at different scales. In the old days, I would be doing this underwater with a tape and chain, but all of this information can be got out of the same data set now. So just going over it with a camera in an appropriate methodology, you can actually get much more data out of it. And lots of work has also been using basically 3D models taken at different time points to measure change, whether that's in something like growth or even erosion. A lot of work's going on in the tropics, I guess because of ease of access to the water and because of water clarity, but it's increasingly been done in temperate regions and indeed polar regions. So we recently had a publication basically on the combination of photogrammetry and machine learning to measure biomass. So that's something I'll go into a little bit more of. John and I currently do a lot of work on what's known as the North Sea 3D project. It's an Insight-funded project looking at how we can take industry ROV footage, and so basically footage taken by offshore wind or offshore oil and gas by their ROVs for inspection purposes, and how we can use that to measure marine growth, so epifouling, biofouling on offshore structures. So the idea is to take ROV footage, create 3D models, and then segment or annotate those 3D models by using machine learning. Because basically the idea is if we can measure the biovolume if our model is scaled, and if we can break down the biovolume by species and we know what the density of that species should be, we can convert it into biomass. That's the aim of the project. So we've done lots of work with kind of common biofouling species in the North Sea. John went up to Shetland. This is the Ninian platform that came ashore. And we've also got some data from Schiehallion. And basically by creating 3D models of coral colonies, this case Desmophyllum and Petusum, and then weighing them, we can plot the biovolume against biomass to understand their relationship. And if we can do that for enough common biofouling species, we can start to get large models of offshore structures and start to work out the biomass. And it works very well. So that same model that I showed you earlier in 2D, here's the 3D version of it. And we have applied our machine learning algorithm to identify the species. This video is using it's almost perfect version, but we've got a better rendition later where the machine learning algorithm was working better. But on the bottom there, you can kind of see the transition. We create a 3D model, we annotate it by species, and then we're able to isolate those species from the model, and we can measure their volume, and using the kind of species-specific density conversions, turn that into biomass. And the two graphs you can see there on the right, basically what that's showing is, I think the top one is, it's a validation of the annotation of the 3D model by machine learning. So it's basically a comparison of the machine learning annotation and the human annotation. And they're all, by most species, hovering around the kind of 100% mark. Metridium, which is Metridium dianthus, and an enemy, is a little bit far off. And then the bottom one is actually a comparison of the biomass as estimated using our model to the actual biomass. So you can see those quadrats in the model there. We actually removed the, in this case, it was either an urchin, Alcyonium digitatum, a soft coral, or Metridium, and we weighed them. So it was a combination, it was a comparison between our method of measuring the biomass and their genuine biomass. And again, for Alcyonium and for the urchins, the similarity between the two methods was around 100%. I think it slightly overestimated the biomass in Alcyonium and underestimated it in the Echinus esculatus, the common urchin. Metridium is more of a problem species for us, and that's basically because Metridium can, depending on whether it's feeding or not feeding, take on huge amounts of water, and therefore increase its volume without a kind of concurrent increase in its biomass. But how this works for what our actual intended purposes, this is ROV footage from one of our collaborators, Ørsted, and you can see it's created a model of a part of a wind farm jacket. And then we apply our machine learning algorithm, and it's identified all the, mostly in this case, Metridium dianthus. So it's working very well. We've also applied kind of similar technology to surveys, more kind of a natural habitat. Last year, we were in Greenland on the west coast doing ROV surveys of fjord walls. As ROVs have become cheaper and smaller, they allow us to do more and more of these surveys and to start to access places we don't know very much about. So kind of deep portions of fjord walls, the Greenland government have absolutely no idea about at all. So we went out there to do these surveys, but we also knew that we were going to be collecting huge amounts of data. So again, we've applied this kind of combination between machine learning and photogrammetry. And the idea is to not only assess kind of biodiversity, but also biomass and potentially even carbon content, because we can use that same calibration between bio volume, but instead of converting to biomass, we can convert it to carbon content, which is of interest to our Greenland collaborators. Well, we've come to the end. So in summary, computer vision basically increases the efficiency of our analysis capacity for large data sets of marine imagery, and it extends the metrics we can derive from these images. So I think in the great scale, what this really allows us to do is kind of gain information, ecological understanding at spatial scales that are much more relevant. Rather than looking at individual images or small numbers of individual images, we can look at scales from much larger, which in the bigger scheme of things are more relevant. And that's us. I think I'll stop sharing now. Over to you, Chloe.
That was great. Thank you so much, guys. So I've got the Jamboard link, which I'm going to resend just in case people have more questions. But yeah, first question we've got is, what sort of computer or hardware are you using for these bits of work? As we're potentially scoping a project along these lines with GPU compute internally for our own. Don't really know what that last bit means, but hopefully first bit made sense.
Yeah, it's just it really depends on your budget. As many GPUs as you can afford really is the key. You might find it's best to go for the gaming ones over the kind of the professional, is it Tesla or Quadro lineup? You sort of seem to get more bang for your buck with those. Yeah, it's really the budget dependent. So we've got a big Linux based server now that we're kind of almost looking at setting up in a kind of supercomputer-esque setup where you kind of submit tasks to it. But if you're just looking for something smaller, just a big beefy desktop might do you.
GPUs, and I mean certainly from the photogrammetry side of things as well, CPU is important. Numbers of cores, increased RAM. It's as John says, as whatever you can afford, really. But do go onto the forums, because certainly we looked at increasing the CPU power of our computer recently, our workstations, and it doesn't necessarily scale linearly, does it? We were looking at some crazy high core CPUs, and it for our photogrammetry purposes wasn't necessarily going to be as beneficial.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Cool. Next question we've got. Do you need to train a new model from scratch for each image recognition task, or can you tune existing models?
Very definitely tuning existing models is the way to go if you can. I found with the skates, it didn't really help that much using kind of an existing model. I guess it's quite far out from what existing models have seen. But for most tasks, you want to take a model off the shelf that has training, has weights, and then just tweak that a bit with a few training images. That's generally the most effective way.
So would to tune it, would it have to be sort of similar taxa, or can it be kind of vastly different and it will work it out?
No. It's I think when the models are first trained, it's often the weights that you might be using, the training you might be using is not marine related at all. But the models learn kind of basic rules for vision, like how to find edges and things like that. So that's very applicable to what we do. So just training on a big data set of images will help the model massively, basically.
Great, thank you. Cool. So on that, next question is, how long does the training stage of AI analysis take in your experience?
Good question. It's incredibly hard. I can't really answer because it just depends on the task. So to train a simple object detection model with, say, a training set of 40, 100 images, maybe on our system, that's half an hour, or a lot less now, perhaps. Some of the models that I've been working with recently, I can run them for a week, and they're still going, or even on a really big system. So task dependent, I'm afraid. I guess probably the one that most people seem to want is object detection, and you can train that on a pretty standard desktop in a few hours on the sort of training set that you can probably make yourself. So that might be a realistic time period for most people.
Perfect, thank you. Cool. What have we got next? So the UK underwater environment is often very low visibility. Yay, mud. How does this affect the ability to run photogrammetry?
Yeah, photogrammetry is probably more problematic than the machine learning in many ways.
Shall I?
Yeah, you go for it. Yeah.
The first kind of step in the pipeline of photogrammetry is finding matching points in consecutive images, images that are aligned. The software finds, or should be aligned, the software finds matching points in those images. And I guess as you can imagine, if that image is cloudy, you're not going to find those matching points, so the whole thing falls over.
If you've got lots of backscatter, it can start to try and pick up bits of backscatter and is trying to align those. So I've got a large data set at the moment, which is basically it's an offshore wind farm, and there's the bit that you're interested in the middle, and a lot of kind of water either side of that, which has got lots of speckly bits in it. And so what I'm now effectively doing is just masking it. So I'm saying don't pay any attention to that bit. I just want you to look at this bit because it's and obviously also the reducing the water, increased murkiness, turbidity, increased backscatter, it reduces the actual image effective resolution, and so there's less bits for it to find and align.
Oh, thank you.
So it makes it difficult, but not impossible.
Yeah. No, that's good to know. Thank you. Cool. So next question we've got, how did you georeference or scale your UAV photogrammic model of the intertidal platform?
So the intertidal is done by, it's done by a drone. And we've actually basically just used the onboard GPS of the drone for that mostly. Yeah. That was a particular one that was done on the hoof. And so there are certainly better ways of doing it if you're really interested in absolute accuracy. But for our purposes, that level of accuracy is sufficient.
Yeah, drones use a bit more than the GPS for they combine there's an optical sensor on the bottom of even basic consumer drones now they use, so the scaling's pretty good. Basically, the scaling's all right.
Perfect, thank you. Cool. So next we've got, is there any standardization in how images are processed for AI? I assume there's a room for bias or error if images are over/under processed, e.g. the same image processed in 2 different ways could be recognized differently depending on how the AI has been trained.
Yeah, totally. I guess it's always worth thinking, does the data set that you're running your model on, is that kind of in the same domain as your training set? If it isn't, then you might see, there'll be peculiarities possibly. So keep your processing the same, basically. And if you're not, then there might be issues.
Cool, thank you. And then we've got final question is, how do you envision the integration of photogrammetry and machine learning evolving in the future to address emerging challenges in marine science and monitoring?
Isn't it? Yeah.
Big scale question, that one.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it doesn't need to be used for everything, it just has some applications where it's particularly more relevant and more appropriate than what we're currently doing, and I think certainly what we haven't really said is that this really is only relevant if you have large data sets that are basically just not worth it doing the analysis by hand, because actually the process of going through all the training and so on is quite laborious, so for a very small data set, just a manual analysis is probably going to be less work, but if you are doing, say monitoring, you're going back to the same sites, you're collecting a huge amount of data year on year, then it's very appropriate. And certainly something like photogrammetry, you can actually start to compare. You can basically align the models by different time points to see how the geometry is changing. So if you're looking at, say, I don't know, if you're looking at geodia beds to the west of Shetland, you could literally see how they're growing or not over time. And then the integration with the machine learning would be particularly useful there because you're picking out, the geodia from the seabed.
I think I'm going to disagree slightly, Joe, and say that some of the bigger models that are coming out in other fields, say like in medical imaging, are very good at kind of adapting to different domains. And it might be that soon you can just have an app on your phone that you could wave at sort of an intertidal zone, and in return you get species recognized in 3D kind of come back at you. And I guess the outcome from that is that it takes kind of the you don't need to be a specialist anymore to do this kind of survey, which I think is fantastic. If community groups, for instance, can be empowered to just use their smartphone to survey the intertidal and really pull out the same metrics that we're getting, I think that's awesome. So I'm kind of hoping for more of that.
Nice, that's a positive note. One more question has just popped in. So someone's asked, are there any courses you can recommend for researchers to get training in these processes?
I think a basic Python course would get you a long way in terms of the machine learning. Off the top of my head, no, I can't think of a really good course that you could go on as a marine scientist that would be kind of tailor-made for you.
There's a company called AccuPixel that I know does do a course in photogrammetry, and that's from an underwater standpoint. We do work with them, but neither of us have done the course, so we can't say what it's like. But that is a course out there for photogrammetry, and I guess has an underwater slant to it.
Maybe we should start a course. I think there's a few people.
I think there is some discussions about that kind of thing. Yes, yeah,
should start a course.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. I can see, Mike, you've put your hand up. If you want to unmute, you can just jump in.
Thank you. Sorry, I was unable to access your Jamboard, so I couldn't leave a question for you. It's like a starting point question, really. On the basis that we have imagery and are able to ID things, where would you start if you wanted to delve into AI ID of objects within your imagery? What's a good starting point? I mean, you mentioned a programming course, but what tools are there out there for someone starting off? How would you go about it?
So if you want to kind of avoid the programming side altogether, there's I guess you might have heard of Biggle and Viame. So they're two tools that are out there that do offer a sort of a AI machine learning component for automatic ID. I personally don't use those because I think they push you into a very specific workflow that sometimes doesn't fit the projects that we're on. So if you're not going to use those tools, figure out what task you actually have in kind of computer vision language. Like, is it just object detection, or do you need to think more? Do you need things actually kind of labeling, like semantic segmentation? So just figure out what the name for your task in like computer vision terms. So let's assume that it's object detection. So just drawing boxes around things that you're looking for. So I guess then it would just be developing a training set. So there's a lot of tools out there that you can use to make a training set. So just let you draw around things and kind of export a data set in a machine learning format, and then you should be ready pretty much to hit go on one of these models. And people are packaging them up now in forms that don't really need a programming background to use. If you're familiar with using the command line, it's just as easy as kind of passing a few commands to one of these, and it'll churn away and do its thing and give you some good results back. I hope that's useful. Or drop me an email. Drop us an email and I can help. That might be a better.
That's really useful. Thanks, John. And is there a recommended UK forum to join to ask questions?
I think there is, and its name escapes me. I'll get back to you on that. If there's other questions, and I'll try and find the name of the forum for you.
Great.
What kind of data do you have, by the way? Is it kind of, is it fish? Is it benthic? Is it
Mostly benthic.
Yeah.
There aren't any more questions, unfortunately, to let you think about that. So yeah, I think we'll wrap there for the day, if that's all right with everyone. But thank you so much, guys. That was such an interesting talk. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Yeah, feel free to email. I think our emails are out there, are they? To be shared.
Yeah, I can resend them in the chat as well.
Yeah, exactly. People have individual questions and they can always ask. Yeah,
very happy to help.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.